Hi, I'm Chetan Venkatesh, co founder and CEO of Macrometa, and this is Developer Week. And today I'm really excited to be having a fireside chat with a very special guest who's probably doing one of the most incredible, innovative, future facing activities, which is opening up the telecom network to make it a programmable substrate for developers to build applications on. Now, all of that makes it sound extremely mysterious, but what I'm saying is that Brian Mengwasser, my guest today from Dish Networks, is helping build a new kind of a telecom network, a 5G network that's going to be fully programmable and allow developers, folks like you and me, regular folks who build things in the cloud, to be able to program that telecom network directly. And we're going to talk about why that's so important, how you're going to be able to do those things, but even more fundamentally, what does this mean for all of us when the telecom network starts to become like a cloud? So, welcome, Brian. I'm so excited to have you on this conversation today.
Thank you so much. Me too. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for the invite, and great to talk to all of you in the virtual sphere. I have to tell you, everything you just said is true. Easier said than done. There's a
Sure.
fantastic amount of work going on, but we do it gladly because I think this is really the one of the most profound things that's coming for us in advanced connectivity. It's not about the waveform, it's not about the frequency band, it's about how we make it programmable and how we expose that as a service to the community here and all the wonderful things that we're going to build on top of it. So that's really at the forefront of our mind, and glad to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, and just for full disclosure to the audience, right? I've been hanging out with Brian over copious bowls of ramen and soup and all of that. And every conversation I've had with him has literally blown my mind because I come from the telecom world. I mean, that's where I started my career. And candidly, you know, 20 years, 25 years have gone by and not much has really changed, in that world. And I've actually sprained my eye socket and eyeball from rolling my eyes every time I watch a webinar or a conference where leaders from the telecom industry and the technology CTOs of all these great telecom companies and vendors, talk about fully virtualizing the network like that's a thing. When all of that stuff predated cloud, and cloud is now maybe 10 years old and very mature, in the enterprise world. So, yeah, maybe give us a quick view, Brian, as why is telecom slow and, so conservative in adopting moving forward into this sort of a cloud model?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I completely agree with you, right? A lot of these topics are never heard that one before, right? um, So I like to describe it as telecom is both fast and slow. We're early or late depending on how you look at it. So I think the reality is, but before we had devices and apps and a lot of the technologies we depend on every day, well,
Hmm.
we needed phones, and it was kind of a wondrous thing, right? If we remember back like to the 80s, 90s, that all of a sudden we could make phone calls from our vehicles, right? We could actually drive from New York to Kansas City without dropping a call, right? And so there was a enormous technical challenge to make that happen, right? And it was at huge scale, tens of thousands of engineers working together to make this happen, right? I think, but when we start talking about some of the modern stack that we're used to working with now in the cloud, we're very late, right? Which
Hmm.
is we never found a way kind of to upgrade our at scale infrastructure. I mean, we're talking these critical services run on top of it, right? It's countrywide, continent wide in some cases. We
Hmm.
never found a way to kind of make that migration that other IT systems has been able to make over the past 10 years. And that's definitely one of the things that we're focused on. And we have a bit of an advantage starting as a greenfield from scratch, that we had the opportunity to kind of reinvent it and say, well, what's it going to take? Because obviously we want to get there, right? What's it going to take to make that possible? Um, and I think one of the big things, and we can talk a little bit more about it, is having the right partnerships, right, and having
Hmm.
the right opportunities. So I think we're very much at the bleeding edge of running such a large at scale, and we can put some numbers against this. Our network is sized for over 100 petabytes per day. We generate over an exabyte of metadata already today,
Hmm.
per day. So, if we rewind even like 2, 3 years, I'm not sure that the technology was ready for what we're doing. So we're really trying to push that envelope at the bleeding edge, and make something that hasn't been possible for the past couple of decades because of the scale and the nature of the technology. Now possible because we've reached a certain maturity in the cloud.
So there's so much to unpack in all of that. So maybe I'll just start from the outside in view. For many of us, we think about wireless technology. There's Wi-Fi at home, and then there's cellular access outside. And we went from, I think, LT, what was it? I can't even remember, CDMA to something, and then we got 2G, 3G, and 3G was a pretty big deal. Everybody was sort of like, yeah, 3G is going to do lots of interesting things, and 4G happened. I think we kind of never even called it 4G. I never remember saying I got to go get a 4G phone. But right now, 5G is front and center, and most people think of 5G as just sort of wireless broadband. But there's so much more to it. And from my perspective, at least, there's a really interesting inversion happening in telecom now with 5G. In the up until now, we've always had very thin pipes that went from our devices into the telecom layer, and there used to be a fat pipe from there that went into the cloud. So you could aggregate at the telecom layer, and get things from the cloud. You could have services in the cloud, and the telecom played a very important connectivity, and distribution and connectivity role. But with 5G, that flips over because you've got a fat virtual pipe now from every device into the telecom layer, right? And sure, you can put a lot more plumbing from there into the cloud, but it's so fast. I mean, the latency of 5G is so low that you really should be bringing the cloud directly onto the telecom layer. And that's how you really unlock the power, the potential, and all these visionary apps that 5G can potentially do. I mean, entertaining yourself with, second screen, third screen apps, VR, AR, gaming, or even what are enterprise applications with network slicing and quality of service and all of that stuff. It requires something fundamentally to shift. And I'd love to hear you explain how this transition's happening from 4G to 5G. And it's really architectural shift, paradigm shift, more than just a feeds and speeds shift.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think when we as consumers are thinking about 5G, it's kind of like the next G, right? It's like, oh, it's just faster, it's the next thing, and you definitely should go buy a new phone about that. That's kind of not what we're seeing. We're seeing really fundamental shifts in the architecture of 5G. For example, at the protocol level, that makes it more secure, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's been
Right.
a shift of the architecture towards more microservices, which again is not new for us in this community, but it is new in the telco community. That, for example, we can take individual services from different vendors and compile it together into a best of breed network.
Right.
Totally new concept in telco.
Because
But
it's always been proprietary, soup to nuts before, right? You bought one thing
yeah,
from one vendor all the way, right? So
yeah, and it comes back again to the scale and the reliability, right? If you need something that will cover an entire state or a continent, right, you really need to put a lot of engineering horsepower to that. If you need something that's 5 nines and can support critical messaging, 911 calls, and so forth, you need something that works. But
mhm.
here's where we start to differ, right? So one way of doing that is taking I'm gonna call it the Battlestar Galactica approach, right? Which is you
Mhm.
take an incredibly complicated technology, right? You test the heck out of it in a lab, and then you put it into production, and you basically watch the blinky light, right? And the rule of thumb in order to not break it is just don't touch it.
Huh.
And that works from a reliability standpoint, to be honest, but it doesn't work from an agility standpoint. And
Right.
I don't think it works in the world that we live in today anymore. We live in a world that's constantly changing, right? And to think that I'm going to design a network today that's still going to be relevant and suitable for the use cases that the development community is coming up with 5 years from now just
Mhm.
doesn't make sense. So we need to do a complete 180 shift, right? And start to embrace the complexity. So we have embedded some of the principles of, for example, chaos engineering into our network from the outset, right? Which is things are changing all the time. I have radios in the network that are like below freezing and some of them are 90 degrees, right? So there's a lot of variability, there's a lot of change. But if we
Right.
embrace that, we can get to possibly even higher levels of reliability because we're constantly testing, we're constantly observing. I think the last thing that I would add in here in terms of the shift, I've said this before in different forums, but for me, it's not a 5G story. What we're doing here at Dish Wireless, it's a cloud story. Because when we, as I said, we had this opportunity to reinvent the stack from the ground up. By the way, we're doing this at breakneck speed. I can give you some anecdotes about that.
Hmm.
But when we took a step back and said, well, all right, we live in a dynamic world. How do we build a dynamic network? Well, it was clear to see that we needed to adopt more cloud native principles.
Right.
And when we did that, we said, well, we want to bring cloud technology into the 5G network. But actually, what we had to do first was to build a hyper distributed, what we call a hyper distributed cloud. We had to
Hmm.
build that infrastructure because the requirements of the 5G network mean that you need sub millisecond latency for radio control, very extreme requirements.
Right.
So what we've done so far is actually you know deployed, I think, the largest, most complicated hybrid cloud in the world, running some of our own hardware, running with our partners, AWS. And we put 5G as the first application on top. But of course, we're thinking quite a bit bigger than that. So it's really an evolution of the cloud for me that now can support something like 5G. We get the agility that we want, and now we position ourselves very well for smart pipes.
So hang on, you said something that is so radical, and if you parse that part, I think there's books that have to be written about just what you said over there. So let's take that. You're fundamentally saying, look, 5G is an application of a distributed hyper cloud. That's what I heard you say. Did I hear you right?
Absolutely. That's how we think about it. It's a complex application. It's very challenging from a cloud perspective. As I mentioned, we're on the bleeding edge. But first, we build the infrastructure, the cloud framework. Then we put some radios on the end of it, and we deploy 5G as the first application that actually, in effect, makes it a wireless cloud.
Wow. Okay. So now we're starting to add some texture and some dimensionality to this whole argument, which is that 5G is really a side effect of a platform that is reconstituted from the ground up on cloud native principles. And by building it on software defined, primitives, building it to be distributed from the onset, what you end up with is a combination of a connectivity technology as well as a service platform for you to be able to build and run applications together. So it's converging two things that historically have sort of been complementary, but never together in a very, very powerful way. And so 5G ends up being the killer app to begin with. And then, of course, the cloud that you have probably enables not just 5G, but many other things. So,
Yeah.
give us a little peek of how do you see all of this playing out?
Yeah, and this is what we've been really focused on. So many of you may be familiar with Dish as a company, in terms of maybe you're watching Dish television or using some other services from Dish. The wireless division, building this distributed cloud and this 5G application is new as of a couple of years ago. And so we've really taken a startup attitude, and we've been in the bunker, kind of almost stealth mode, building this thing because we knew that we wanted to kind of transform what networks mean. We knew that we wanted to adopt these cloud native principles, and so we've been pretty much heads down figuring out exactly what that means. But what I think is exciting about this is that now that we've solved the distributed cloud problem for a 5G network, which again, for context here, we're now live in more than 20%, covering more than 20% of the country, and we'll be covering more than 70% of next year. So think about that. In 18 months, we went from nothing to covering 20%. That's blazing speeds, right?
That's insane.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of discussion out there now about like the infrastructure model, how is it evolving, and so on and so forth. And rather than sort of opining about that, we started solving a problem, right? A problem for us. But we had the right leadership in place here to say, well, this is not just going to be a problem for us. Let's build it as a platform, as just a fundamental strategy, right?
Hmm.
Let's solve a problem for us. Let's build it. Again, I think we get benefits in terms of agility, more dynamic and well observed reliability.
Right.
Um, and by the way, we're probably saving money in doing this. But actually, let's then turn that into like, the first app, the first like widely deployed edge app that then can help inform what other kind of applications we can run, right? Can we support those as well? And I think this is where I'm very excited about working with Macrometa, right? About the next generation of applications, right? How can we leverage some of the stuff that we built to really, start bringing this into reality quickly?
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to sort of open up the crystal ball and sort of gaze into the future of what a collaboration between Macrometa and Dish Wireless looks like. You know, uh, I get really excited about the idea that on Macrometa you can build very powerful applications, right, that provide all kinds of interesting and unique digital experiences that are just not a good fit for the cloud because of cloud centralization being far away. But I think when you bring the programmable, layer of the network directly into that, all kinds of amazing things happen. So, you and I were talking about sort of a couple of these applications the other day, right? Where, like, I think we were talking about e-scooters and stuff like that, where you walk up to the e-scooter and it instantly unlocks, you get charged, what have you. So the whole idea is that you should be able to build backend services for that entire application: billing, authentication, user management, where the devices are, using geolocation, for example, to sort of manage this fleet of e-scooters. That's all the stuff that Macrometa does. It provides compute primitives, database primitives, event streaming, all of that stuff. But where it gets really exciting is you've built your app on Macrometa, and now you go to this tab, let's say in the Macrometa console, and has Dish Wireless there, and you can start to compose a network for delivering all of those capabilities all the way to different cities around the world. So if you can just sort of parse that part for our audience over here, what would that kind of look like, where you can compose an entire 5G network on the fly?
Yeah. So again, I think 5G technology is awesome, right? This, distributed cloud tech that we're talking about, and cloud native principles is awesome. But for me, it all boils down to this fundamental belief, right? That the next set of amazing applications is going to come from this community here, right? From all of you that are building whatever it is you're building. I'm amazed by the kind of stuff that you're working on. And we want to be an enabler of that, a catalyzing agent of that, and be a part of it, be a part of your story, really. And so, what does it mean to compose a network? Well, again, I think this is fundamentally new, a new approach, right? Like, you're not going to, knocking on like big corporate door, right, and saying like, hey, can I please have access to your network, right? What what our vision is that really you should define your own network using software, right? So your own policies on the network, right? And maybe some of you are already doing this with an SD-WAN or another more localized network, but I mean like at continent scale, right? From like San Francisco to New York, right? You can define your own network policies, right? Your own routes, your own security posture.
Mm,
You can get down into the radio performance, right? So like depending on your device, maybe your device is battery sensitive and you want to minimize kind of pings back and forth to the radio that you don't really need, or maybe you need to optimize for throughput, right? Maybe you're going really fast, right? If you're a connected car or a drone, for example,
right.
you can actually start to tailor the radio to what your device is doing, the intent of your application is. And of course, you can define the right kind of compute and storage on a latency basis, right? What do you need? And all of this, we're really thinking, we're leaning hard and embracing the cloud first mindset, which is consumption, right? It's
Wow.
not, we're not going to take 18 months and negotiate this, right? It's come create an account with us and start building your network tomorrow. Pay for what you use, right? And tell us what you need, and we're going to keep adding functionality into the network to enable your apps.
Wow, that is just so orthogonal to how we consume the network today, right? Which is going to open an account with one of the big telecom companies, get billed every month. And if I want to sell something or partner with a telecom company, 2-year journey, right? Go bang on all their doors and convince their management that there's an actual appetite for all of this. And I can see why you're saying there's no agility in that model, right? Because startups need to experiment. I mean, developers need to build something, throw something out there, iterate on that, you know, And I think the combination, the cloud has been such a powerful enabler because there was already an agility mindset that was coming, from the old days. I think they call it extreme programming, right? This whole idea that you fail fast and keep
Yeah.
iterating, right? And it sort of combined with the cloud turned into the DevOps movement, right, of today. And what you've done, or what you're doing at Dish Wireless, is just sort of really providing now the last mile of that, and providing a DevOps type of infrastructure now for you to be able to integrate the network and converge the network into the application very, very tightly.
Yeah. I've heard from a number of developers that have worked in the 4G LTE era on mobile devices, mobile applications, and the phrasing is always about like having to work around the network, right?
Mm.
Like it's this black box concept. You can't see into it. You don't get any observability. You kind of get what you get from a policy and security standpoint. And so you need to kind of build your scaffolding on the app side and on the device side to kind of work around it. And we just feel like that's a lot of extra effort, right? And like taking a DevOps mindset, who has time for the toil, right? Like, why don't we try to simplify it so that we
Right.
get the experience that we want without having to do too much of working around. It's just a bad architecture, right? To have this black box sitting in your stack. So that's was a big motivator for us to just like, what's it going to take for us to unlock this thing and to hand over the keys of your portion of the network to you, the developer, right? To do what you need to do with it. And I mean, honestly, I can't. We're talking about these use cases. I can't wait to see what we're getting in this new era, in the 5G era, right? Hyper distributed cloud, edge enabled app era. I think we're going to see some magic, right? From an experience standpoint, you walk up to a scooter and it already, it unlocks itself and then it knows your name, right? And probably where you're going. It's going to give you directions. Um, I think yeah, I just can't wait to see, how this all materializes for us. But
I
it's
tell you,
very
the
exciting
the
time.
first app I'm gonna write, Brian, I'm personally gonna write this because I'm so frustrated. My I'm not gonna name the car that manufacturer that I've bought my car from, but they're trying to sell me a $15 a month subscription for the crappiest app on the phone. It takes I'm not exaggerating when I say it takes about 5 minutes to connect to my car to show me all kinds of useless things like, what's the temperature inside the car? How much gas do I have? And I can turn the weather, the conditioning, climate conditioning, and those types of useless things. And it is so frustrating because there's so much possibility in that use case, right? I mean, I would
Yeah,
love to know, how fast is my son driving when he's driving my car, for example. He just turned 18 a year back, and he's out there. I'd love to build geofences, and get alerts. And of course, I got to do this outside in Apple or something like that. I can kind of do some parts of it there, but there's so much of possibility and potential when you combine an application platform that allows you to program these things and bring a network that's smart and intelligent. Because what you've almost described over there is that the network is almost polymorphic in its behavior, right? Because it has to support all these different high bandwidth, low latency, as well as battery and energy consumption types of use cases, mobility versus non-mobile. There's just a lot that the network needs to be able to, provide for. And I think we'll all build applications that consume many parts of the network for different things. I mean, there might be parts of the application that needs low latency. There are other parts that are not latency sensitive. Almost related to the way we build applications on databases. We've got fast databases for the things that we need to access quickly, and we've got things that are cheap and deep for other things, for example. And you should be able to slice and dice and use what makes most sense for your app.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's just it's sort of crazy to me. I mean, imagine we were in a world where there was only one type of database, and if you
Right.
wanted to, if you
Well, we
wanted to
lived in that
transact
world for a
any
long
data,
while.
yeah, but unfortunately, until we've been trying to crack this nut open, right? We've been in that world, right, where you basically have one network that is solving for the lowest common denominator. Okay, you want the reliability, you want these other things, but the reality is the use cases are so different, right? As a developer, what backend you're talking to, right? So why take a very circuitous route defined by me? I don't know anything about your application, right? A very circuitous route in the network to get to your backend. Why don't
Mhm.
you just instruct the network, your portion of the network, to route directly the way where you want to, right? And pay for what you need from a performance, latency, and so forth standpoint. Recoup the cost, offload data at night, or whatever kind of makes sense for your application. We're just opening up many more degrees of freedom. And I think it makes much more sense in the world that we live, where connectivity between the devices in the real world and the clouds, wherever they are, is essential,
Yeah.
but it's not the same, right? It's very application dependent. And we think, we're going to get to, let's say, much greater value, right? By exposing this and allowing it to be adaptable to the application.
Wow, what a mind-blowing conversation, and I can't wait for all of this to, to manifest next year in phases and, make all this available. Just a sneak peek for folks on the collaboration that we're putting together with Dish Wireless between Macrometa and me and Brian and our teams. We're figuring out how to actually bring the Dish Wireless API directly into Macrometa, so that as you build an application in Macrometa, then you can configure the network. You can literally, as you said, best of breed composition. You can pick and choose which regions, which locations, what's your stack going to look like, and what do you want to use for your software? What do you want to use for your radios? Push a button and Dish Wireless composes the entire stack dynamically in minutes for you. And your, 5G, 6G, the G doesn't matter, but your network, literally, the wireless cloud comes up real time once you hit that button and you can deploy. And you can do this with one customer, one user, all the way to millions. You can scale up and down like you do in the cloud. And that to me is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And it's such a beautiful concept. So just a little bit on that, Brian, before we wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm extremely excited to be testing with you now already, to get to the point where we're at scale. Yeah, it can be one device, but it can be one device in every city in the country, right? I mean, it can go that fast, right? And that's what we're setting up for in terms of our scale and in terms of our partnership here. That you don't need to learn a new technology. You don't need to learn 5G. We're just going to simplify that for you. You build what you need to build in the application, and we're going to be there to support you with the network.
Amazing. Thanks, Brian. This has been a fantastic conversation. Folks who are watching, stay tuned for some interesting previews of these ideas coming together between Dish Wireless and Macrometa in early 2023. So it's just a few months away when we hope to be able to show you some of these exciting integrations that we're planning. So until then, stay in touch. Come to macrometa.com. And how do our audience learn more about what Dish Wireless and you're doing, Brian?
Yeah, so come to our website as well. Connect with me. We're cultivating our community as well in terms of other platforms and partnerships. You're going to see a lot more from us now that we're kind of coming out of the stealth mode bunker and poking our heads up. And we want to hear from you, right? What would you love to be able to do with the network, right? Come push us and challenge it. We're pushing all of our partners, right? And at the end of the day, we need you, right? We need your ideas, your applications to push us to be able to realize and deliver on this vision. So very excited to be here. Thanks again for the invitation. And yeah, stay tuned for what's coming.
Awesome. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Bye.